All right. Well, hello and welcome. Let me just switch this up first. Uh, Happy Mother's Day and congratulations for investing in the future of your family by joining us on AI Parenting Live. We're a judgment free community moving from screen time to quality time. And our motto is don't sedate, relate to create. And sometimes the best way to relate is to be a part of the journey, the struggles, the successes of others who have been in a similar situation. And that's precisely why we're so excited to share heartwarming stories with Rachelle Dene Poth. She's live today. And if you have any questions or if you'd like to say hi, please don't hesitate to say hi in the comments. Stories are so much more fun when we're relating it to our own experiences. Now, Rochelle's authored over 5 books, including In Other Words, quotes that push our thinking. Her Thrive in EDU consultancy serves both AI and VR companies in education. Rochelle is an attorney who also has a master's degree in instructional technology, and she serves as a future ready instructional coach and an Edu Gladiator core warrior and an affiliate of the Pushing Boundaries consultancy. Hey, George, good to see you. Awesome. Um, Her recent book called True Story uh, collects stories from many educators about that one kid who made an impact on them. And so, Rochelle, we would love to get to know you about how you developed your passion for sharing stories. So, if we like turn back the clock and to when you started in education, what like struggle did you have to overcome in order to become the person that you are today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on today to talk with you. I've been looking forward to it. Just excited to be here with you and to see who joins in and hopefully who will join in the conversation as well. But gosh, going back to when I started teaching feels like a really long time ago. But there's two parts that I consider to be when I started teaching, because I have the first when I graduated and had my first teaching job, which is still where I am teaching. Then after teaching first and going to law school and then graduating, I feel like that's another part where I started teaching again. So yeah, if I go back to the very beginning, I know that the onset, I mean, I was very young when I started teaching. And the first thing for me was trying to figure out how to balance things. And that meant preparing for class because I had multiple different subjects, levels of Spanish and French that I was teaching. Also, trying to figure out how to balance all of the clerical tasks that come along with teaching, trying to figure out how to set kind of boundaries with students and building those interactions and those relationships with them and getting to know them. And I am so different now compared to how I was back then because when I first started teaching, I was teaching the way that I had been taught. And in my school, I was back then because when I first started teaching, I was teaching the way that I had been
Are
taught.
you
And
hearing
in my
me,
school,
Rochelle? Let me know if like your audio
I was back
just
then
cut out.
because when I first
Maybe
started teaching,
if you're running
I was
into
teaching the
some
way that I had
audio
been taught.
issues,
And
you
in
can
my
just
school,
reconnect, Rochelle. We can bring you back in, but your audio
I was back
just
then
cut out.
because
Or is
when I
it
first
just my
started
audio? Can
teaching,
others hear
I was teaching
your
the way that I had
audio
been taught.
issues?
And
You
in
can
my
just
school,
reconnect, Rochelle. We can bring you back in, but your audio
I was back
just
then
cut out.
because
Or is
when
it
I first
my
started
audio? Can
teaching,
others hear
I was teaching
your
the way that I
audio
had been taught. And
issues? You
in
can
my
just
school,
reconnect, Rochelle. We can bring you back in, but your audio.
I
Oh,
was
I know
back
what.
then.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me? Were you hearing an echo?
I was hearing an echo, and
Oh,
I didn't
I
know where it
apologize.
was.
Oh, that's probably my fault. I'm sorry about that. Uh,
That's okay.
uh, you never know when it comes to these systems, right? Like, yeah, there's different
Oh,
a million different ways to give feedback, and so something to be aware of for the future. You
yeah.
were just speaking a little bit about your own story when you started fairly young about just working as an educator. And maybe you can
Right.
expand a little bit on like, well, what kind of like things did you have to work through in order to get to make it in that situation?
Yeah, it was tough, and you that goes back many years. So we didn't have all of the different digital tools and spaces that we have now that enable us to really, in light of especially the past year, where we didn't, many teachers didn't start the school year in their classrooms with their students, trying to figure out how to build those relationships. We didn't have all of that available to us back then. And when I started, I was, like I was saying, I was teaching the way I had been taught. And so for me, going into my classroom meant like I had to teach French for today, and this is what I had to cover. And there had to be homework and not time for socialization or any of those things. And I was very guarded with the way that I kind of set up the boundaries in my classroom between myself and my students, and how much I let them know about me and my personal life, because that wasn't something that I was familiar with. And what I learned over at least the first 5 years of teaching is that students really, one, they want you to know about them, and two, they need for you to know about them, because for us as teachers, the best way that we can provide for them is to really get to know our students. And I've said it so many times, like if I could go back to the beginning of my career and change some of my interactions, some of the activities that I set up for my classroom, take back some of the times where I said, no, we're not going to talk about summer breaks or holiday breaks or anything. Don't ask me any questions like that. If I could go back and change a lot of that, because it's in those stories from what I've learned since then that we truly get to understand people, what they're bringing with them when they come into our classroom, whether it's our classmates, into our schools, if it's our colleagues. And we also learn about how to best prepare and provide for them by doing that. And that is something, that a lot of the writing that I've been doing, when I talk to people, they say, what's the best advice that you could give? And I say, well, I don't know that I can give the best advice, but if somebody were to tell me just one thing, I would say just focus on those relationships and getting to know people and their stories and what they're bringing into your classroom, into your schools every day. And so that became part of what I've really been invested in over the last couple of years, is just getting to know people. And you know why did you make a certain decision, or how did you get to this point in your career, or anything, whatever it is. It's just I've developed a lot of curiosity about others, and I've also noticed that I wasn't so willing to share my own story. And so I think that's what gives me the drive to help people feel comfortable sharing their stories too.
Oh, wow. I love that, Rochelle. Like, what I love about it is that, like, you're starting off as this person who's, like, totally not willing to share their story, like, totally guarded, and you're not asking about other people about their stories, and then suddenly it was like, "Man, I really regretted that." Like, there was this opportunity for me to connect with them at another level, and you kinda realize that through, collecting all of these stories, that it was like, that's how you really get down to the heart of where people are at. Like, what are their real pains, their struggles, their goals, their aspirations, like all of those things are revealed in these stories. And I'm so glad that you're here today to share those, because I feel like it's the same. Like many of us, we don't share our stories in the same way. And so, oh, I think Rochelle is dropped. She'll be joining us again shortly. Yes, perfect. You're back.
Yay,
Perfect.
magic.
So one of the things that we are really excited about today is we're going to be sharing, like we said, today is all about those stories. So we call it the heart of connecting, and the heart of connecting is really through stories, and we're going to cover three different aspects. So the first one is just like stories of everybody. We think everybody's normal until we get to know them, and then we find that hey, we're weird too. And so like I'm weird too will be like what weird these how these weird stories they help us relate with each other. We'll also be talking about number two, which is connecting with technology, overcoming barriers to engaging. Sometimes this is a good indication of what is important to them, and then we'll learn about like behind the what's behind all the behaviors that we see. How do we get to that story, and how do we know the story behind what might be causing those behaviors? So without further ado, I'd love to get us started with kind of an interesting story. Like we before we had talked a little bit about this notion of, man, I can't share these things. Like they're so weird. People see them. And I mean, like, you're like, we can't connect like that. Come on. Maybe you can tell us about like your own kind of like there's this feeling of awkwardness, when you share your story. Rochelle, like, yeah, let us know.
Yeah. So it's funny because I've had a lot of conversations with other educators or even students sometimes too. And I think that's where it stemmed from years ago. I mean, when I was a kid, of course, there were kids that would say, "Oh, you're weird," or "That's weird," or something. And it made you feel really bad, right? Because you're just like, "Oh, because weird is bad." And I think for a long time, everybody has this idea that if something is weird, that equates it with being bad. And I didn't think about it for a long time until being in my classroom and noticing my students saying things like, "Oh, so and so is weird," or "That's weird," or and I said, "Everything's weird. Everybody's weird. There's something weird about every single thing that's out there. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing." I said, "I'm weird. I do different things. I have different interests than you. That's what makes each of us unique." And that's just on the student side. Now, I've had other educators, friends, colleagues from my PLN who have said different things at times too, where they say, "Oh, yeah, my students think I'm weird," or my family, whoever, thinks that I'm weird. Or they refer to somebody as being weird, and I said, "Well, that's okay because that just it's something different or unique that makes us us. It's our authentic selves." And there was one time that, and I don't know, I can't recall if I had told you this or not, but it was about a year and a half ago, and I had a colleague from my PLN reach out and just said, "I don't think that I'm cut out for teaching. I love what I do. I get excited to go to school every single day, but I feel like I'm just too different. I'm just weird. I don't fit in." And
Oh,
I felt so bad. I said, "Well, and we talked about it a little bit, and through Voxer actually, because Voxer is
okay.
great for those conversations whenever nobody, your schedule isn't in sync." And I said, I asked a lot of questions, and I said, "First of all, thank you for confiding in me." And I said, "What you're feeling, everybody else has felt at some point." I said, "I felt the same thing 2 years ago." I said, "But the difference was I didn't tell anybody about it. I just kept it to myself, like I was having challenges or I felt like I didn't fit in or anything." And that didn't do me any good. Now, of course, it's easy to look back and say, "Geez, I wish I would have said that to somebody." I said, "But just the simple fact that you're telling me, it's okay." I said, "Because what I'm hearing from you is not that you don't like teaching. You don't, it's not that you're having challenges with behaviors or balancing all the tasks or anything." I said, "You're just feeling that about yourself." I said, "So what is making you feel that way?" And she had some different examples of things. And I was like, "I get that all the time. Like, that's a normal thing." Now, this person was newer to being in education. They had had a prior job before teaching. And so it's a different experience. So you might have 10 years where you've been working in the business world and your personality doesn't really change at all. And then you come into the classroom and you're still your genuine, authentic self, but it's just a shift a little bit. And so we had a really good conversation. I had actually reached out to Dave Burgess at the time, and I said, "Hey, I would really love to get a copy of Teach Like a Pirate for my friend because she's really struggling right now. And could I get that? And if you would sign it?" And he did, and he sent it to her, and it made a huge difference. And after, I guess, maybe part of our conversation and then reading the book, like, that helped. But the only reason that it helped is it came down to she shared the story with me and she felt comfort in sharing that story. So you have to have two pieces. One, you have to have that courage to kind of say to somebody and show vulnerability and say, "All right, this is what I'm experiencing." And then you also have to have somebody that you trust and that you have a relationship with, that you feel okay enough to do and reach out and confide that in them. And so, luckily for her, and luckily for me too, because I learned just listening to those stories and wanting to help somebody, because I've been there. I mean, we've all been there. And going back to the weird thing, I mean, how many times, anybody who's in education, you've heard your students in your classroom calling each other weird or whatever. And I jump right in and I just say, "I'm weird. I do these things." And it helps you feel a little bit more normal sometimes too, to realize, like, "Oh yeah, other people do that, or other people think that way or experience that." And we don't get to that point unless we're sharing those stories and experiences anyway. So
I love that. Like, I feel like, like a lot of people don't think it's okay. They don't think it's okay to share what we're struggling with. And being able to start by saying, "Yeah, I'm weird too," is just a way of making it normal for others.
right. Totally
Um,
agree.
that's such an important message that, we are. in this world where everything, like, it's obsessed with perfection. And suddenly you think like, oh, like I'm gonna share something that's not perfection, and people are not gonna be okay with it, like they're going to think that it's weird. But it's actually the opposite. Like, it's actually the perfection that pushes you away from other people. And it was the connection with other people and you sharing your struggles that made it feel like, oh, this person's actually authentic. Like, this
Right.
person I can connect with, this person, they know my struggle. And that's the
Mhm.
thing, is like, people don't really, they're not really that concerned about how well, like, things are going for you. They actually want to relate to themselves, right? Of what it is that they're going through as well. And when we share those struggles, we are doing exactly that. So
Right.
that's really helpful. But it kind of makes me curious about what. So when we look at those anxieties, those fears, those struggles, right? Like, what are we saying to ourselves? Like, is there certain kind of messages that hold us back from sharing stories? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, what can we do to get over those barriers?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something that holds us back, and I don't know if it's just prior experiences that we had, whether it was a personal experience or something that we observed, and you just kind of feel like, yeah, that's going to happen to me, or I'm going to get this response that holds us back from it. And it's the whole idea of vulnerability too, because you put yourself out there and you don't know how somebody's going to respond to whatever it is that you say or an action that you take. And I think it's just, you really open yourself up. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, for a long time, it was just, okay, I'm having these challenges, or I'm not really sure what to do. And I feel like I'm better off just staying in my own space and not involving anybody else in it and working out on my own, because I don't know how they're going to respond to that. And that's not really, it's easier to say now than it was to realize back then, but that is not something that as an educator that we need to do. We need to embrace, like, taking those risks and asking for help, because just even in our classrooms we see all the time students, and that was a kind of a wake up call for me too, is that students would say, I don't want to answer, I'm going to get it wrong, or somebody's going to laugh at me, and there are all of these different reasons why they didn't want to respond or participate in class. And for a while, I could see that look on their face, because I'd experienced that same feeling where I'm just like, the nerves take over. And if I say
Mm.
something and it's wrong, I'm going to be embarrassed, or people might laugh at me, or whatever any of those things could be. And so I would kind of back off a little bit. But then after my own experiences of being in those uncomfortable positions, I was better prepared to kind of work with students to say, hey, you know what? Do you not have any idea how many mistakes I make every single day? Like, there is learning in mistakes, and it's okay. I mean, laugh at yourself, whatever, we're all in this whole ongoing journey of learning here. So just have to go with it. And I said, if you're wrong, so what? I said, do you think I never make mistakes? And I'll name a couple of things. And I think the perceptions from students looking at teachers is that educators don't make mistakes, but we do. We do. We're human. We make a lot of mistakes, and
Oh, I love
the
this so
best
much.
the best thing we could do is to just, like, model that, share that, and embrace it. But it takes time, and it's not something, people can look at other educators or anybody in any profession and see how they are on a daily basis, like, oh, they have this job, or they've accomplished this thing, or they just won this award, or they've gotten this recognition. But you don't always know the story behind it. You don't know what the struggles that were involved. You don't know how long it took. You don't know. There's so much that you don't know. You
The
just
tip of the
see,
iceberg is all we're
yes,
seeing, right?
it's the iceberg. I was thinking the iceberg image, and that is so often shared. And it's true. Like, you don't know about all of that. And so sometimes you see that somebody had these great successes, and you don't realize that it took them 9,000 tries to get to that one point. All you see is that one point
Exactly.
until
Oh, I love
those
this so
people
much,
share that.
Rochelle. You know, uh, to me, it reminds me of when I was just talking about tech with other educators as well, and the same thing applies for parents as well. There's this feeling that they got to know everything, right? Because like they've gone from being these experts of pedagogy, experts in teaching and the material and the content, to learners of the technology, right? Like it's like such a humbling thing when it comes to like, oh, how do I do this thing with technology that I don't really understand. And so And it's often the case that maybe some of the students in your own class or maybe your own kids like know it better than you do. And you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so out of place right now. Like, how could I ask anybody about questions about computer stuff? Like, I would seem so dumb. I can't do this right now. But it's also like, um, it, it wasn't helping to connect with other people. Just the fact that you had a lot of knowledge didn't mean that they were going to gain that knowledge,
Right.
or that they would be motivated to gain that knowledge. And then in the same way, it's like when you did the opposite and you said, like, I don't actually know all this stuff either. Like, I don't want to go claim that like I'm the world expert on something like AI. I want to say that I'm learning with you guys as well, because it's in those struggles, like things that I don't know, that I'm learning, that I want to share with you, that becomes way more authentic. So I love that. Oh my goodness, we got a lot of stuff in the chat
I
from George. He
know.
says
I
thank
see that.
you. So love it. He also asks, people do not realize all the failures and years before someone sees success.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that everybody. It seems like everybody seems like the overnight success, right?
I
And
wish.
but it's never overnight. Like there's always that kind of moving from there. He says, "Aw." So that's what I love about your body of work. It's ever evolving and it's so impactful to our profession. Great
Too
job.
kind. Thanks, George.
So I think that that kind of leads into the next point here, and I think that now that we've talked, like just as a recap, it feels like it was that sharing of the struggles that really made it easy for us to connect with others, and it was like this level of like I describe it as like vulnerability. Like, people are connecting through vulnerability. And when you're not willing to be vulnerable, it's actually very hard to connect with other people, and people don't learn like with people that they don't like. And so this notion that they've got to like you, they kind of have to connect with you before they're really going to start learning from you. And it does seem like, how do I do this? Like, I'm so overwhelmed. There's so many things going on. And especially with our world of tech, which kind of leads into the next question. Like, you know, we see tech as this massive distraction, but that's not always the case. Like sometimes we can use tech in order to connect with other people. We can use tech in order to grow our connection with others. And I think that that might be a good way of segueing into the next portion. Is like Rochelle, like what would you suggest? Are there any suggestions for using like tech to get into their interests and get to like maybe know them a little bit better? What would you have to say in that area?
Yeah, when I think about, gosh, again, going back to the beginning of my teaching career and then moving forward a little bit, the first days of school, for example, I was always diving into here's the rules, here's what to expect. All right, let's get started. And then I got away from that and started to do some icebreakers and getting to know students. And I know very well, just because I spent so many years as a student, whenever you do things like, say, icebreakers, or even in as adults, as professional development, you go to a conference or something like that. I just find it so interesting how nervous I would get in speaking in front of my peers. And that was not something that I even considered with my students, because they would ask, can we just do this presentation just with you or in our seats and nobody else pays attention? And I said, but you're speaking in front of your classmates. And that was kind of a wake up call to me to realize, like, one, I needed to put myself out there more and share my story, who I am, connect with other educators, but I needed to set up ways for students to build relationships with their classmates and also for me to get to know them. But that didn't necessarily mean that it would happen overnight or in person one-on-one conversations, because people are shy. People aren't necessarily comfortable speaking, sharing with their teachers or with other classmates. And so one of the things that I really value about all of the different options we have out there for looking at digital technology or digital tools and ed tech is that, especially in this past year where so many schools started not in person, and you're trying to figure out, how do we get to form this kind of community with our students, with them, with each other, with our students and their families and us together. And so leveraging some of these tools. And so just even having a quick space, like I have had students who in the past we would use before Flipgrid, we were using something called Recap, which is now it's from Swivel. And so they have Synth. But I had students who really did not want to share anything about themselves in class in person, but they had no problem recording a video. And then if I played the video in class in front of their classmates, which was basically an about me, kind of an introduction. And I said, but your video is there playing, and they said, yeah, but I was able to do it at home where I was comfortable, nobody around. If I made mistakes, I could record it again, and then once I knew that I was comfortable with the final product, it didn't matter who you showed it to because I was confident and I felt good about what I had presented in that. And so creating those spaces, like using some of the tools where, and maybe it's not speaking, it might just be having the conversation, messaging. It doesn't always have to be like the video because some people don't like to be on camera, as we know, right?
That's right.
I can't tell you how many ceiling fans I was teaching in class this year just because that's ceiling fans and window blinds because they didn't want to show their face. So it's nice that we
Mm.
have so many different tools that are out there that enable us to communicate and collaborate regardless of where we actually are and in a way that meets our specific interests, needs, and comfort levels too.
I love that, Rochelle, because I do feel that something like recording a video of yourself, and being able to delete it and just go like, you know what, I want to try again. I want to give myself more opportunities is a great way of getting comfortable. And I feel like more and more because there is so much stuff out there. Like if you're not in front, like if you're not comfortable in front of a camera, there's a lot of things that are a lot harder for you. Doing job interviews becomes really awkward. Having meetings with other people, even like doing like a business transaction of any sort. Like these are all things that if you can feel more comfortable or if you can train yourself to feel more comfortable, this will help you in the long term. Not just about you becoming a celebrity or anything. It's about like just the basic communication. This is how we talk to each other. And as much as possible, like we're just trying to have like as close to a face to face. You're
Right.
gonna have to talk to people face to face eventually, and you can't hide behind the webcam that's pointing to the ceiling all the time. So I love that. So you're right on the you're right on the money here, and I love how you're explaining that. And so you're saying that for some people, it's like they're shy, right? Like, or they feel about themselves. And I'm kind of going back to the previous question, like,
Right.
sometimes people have these anxieties in the same way that they have anxieties of sharing their stories. Mm, like, what is it that gets people? What have you found that kind of gets people maybe out of their shell or gets people more comfortable with going? Yeah, okay, I'm okay with sharing with other people at this time.
Yeah. Sometimes it has been where they've been able to kind of work with a partner, for example, and have somebody there that's with them and they have a conversation or they work on something together and then that becomes something that they share and just slowly building that comfort. Also, just asking students, I'll use a form or a survey or something at the beginning of the year and ask them what their preferences are and offer some different options and choices for them and just to get to know them and to help them to kind of build up that confidence, especially in teaching Spanish. Students need to feel comfortable speaking in front of their classmates. And so I want to kind of structure as much as I can, having them build up their skills like, okay, fine, we're going to write. Okay, you don't have to have the camera on. Okay, let's try just the audio, for example, and then build up progressively over time until they really are comfortable.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about like providing multiple ways or multiple opportunities um,
Right.
to practice like a new language, for example.
Yes. Yeah. It's just, it has worked in my classroom and I've seen the students build their confidence and become more comfortable, which even though, like, let's say they're using a video that they're recording at home and then being played in the classroom, I've seen them become more comfortable in the classroom because they had that kind of comfort level already built in because they knew that the video was good to go for them. And so when their voice and their video were being shown, and then the conversations that followed after that, they started to build those relationships and feel more comfortable in the classroom. And so it definitely has made a difference.
Oh, okay. So that's different. So you were saying like it's the like in a video game, like there's that level one, and getting past level one, like just saying like, hey, I've got a video pre-recorded of me that I'm going to share with everyone. That's a way of getting people connected and getting them comfortable to say like, okay, then I want to do a follow up. I have a question. You're more willing to answer that in front of the whole class, for example.
Right. Right. And that has worked.
Hmm. Um, that kind of relates to Marianne's request. She's asking, is she dreaded having to do a book report in front of her classmates? So I wondered whether or not it's in the same way, like this awkwardness of being in front of the whole class. And I remember talking about this too when it came to tech. It was always about the simple things that you could do. And if it was like a large touch screen, I remember like the simple task of like you drag an object from outside the classroom to inside the classroom, just that simple like drag and drop made it so that you feel more comfortable being in front of the class and using something like an interactive touch screen. Just because people are so like they're so hesitant when it comes to technology, and if their first try is going to be a negative one, they're not even going to try it. And so
Right.
you kind of have to get over like step number one, level number one. They haven't got past it.
Yeah, and I remember when I had gotten a smart board in my classroom, my students were a little bit nervous about going up and using it at first, just because it meant they had to get out of their seat and walk to the front of the room. And I know that in the same situation in a professional development session, I didn't want to go up and use the smart board in front of my peers in that meeting. And that's again when I realized that I needed to set up some things in my classroom to help students become more confident, but I also need to put myself out there, do the exact same thing as well.
Mm, that's so important. That's so important. Well, I'm glad you're sharing that. um, so one thing that it reminds me of, and it makes me think of like now that you mentioned it, was uh, how this we see all these things inside the classroom and we kind of make a conclusion like this person's not ready or they're not participating in class, for example. What are the things that we can do like to understand, and this kind of relates to the next section. And of course, if you guys have any questions, like we are here to answer them. I've seen a few of them, so I'm glad to have the interaction today. um, One is about oops, not that one. It's behind the behavior, right? So sometimes there's this story behind all these behaviors that we see, and we're yeah, like that experiencing, we're struggling with, that we see either at home or we see in an educational setting. And I think you've done some work to kind of get behind them, like to understand their story. Can you tell me a little bit about like what does this process look like? How do we get to that point, Rochelle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did want to say one thing. The book report, that was my mom. I remember having
Mm,
to do book reports in front of classmates too. Although it's interesting. In 10th grade, I think I had a public speaking course, and I was so afraid of it. But then I loved it because I got to speak about what I was interested in, and so.
mm,
But back to your question, getting to know the students. I've had some students over the years, and there were this happens to all of us. We find out about students that may be new to our school, new to our classes, and we have information or teachers share information about them. And you have this idea about who they are. And I had some experiences over the past probably 8 or 10 years where I had some students coming in. And of course, I was a little bit nervous about what to expect. And I feel like now that I can look back, and I had one big experience where I really, I finally saw the student and not the behavior, is what I had referred to it as, is I was kind of preparing each day in a sense that I had that student class based on what I knew about their behaviors and the experiences that they had in classes before mine. And that wasn't something that I should have been doing, nor that I'm proud of now. But that was just part of the process. And that was like the norm, I guess you could say, every single year. And then I had an experience a couple of years ago where same thing, the student I knew about, and I would pair, and I'm like, oh, how's this going to go? We're always nervous as teachers because it in our classrooms, we never know what could happen at any given minute, right? We have to be prepared for everything. We have to be flexible, especially this year with like all the things and technology, you name it. And
Yeah, no kidding.
nothing
Yeah.
is ever perfect. But the but then one day I just had a chance to actually sit and work with a student one on one. And I remember it was on a Friday. After that class period was over, I didn't really know how I felt. It was an interesting feeling. I remember talking to one of my friends and saying, I don't know what just happened, but I feel like I finally saw and got to know this student. And I didn't remember any of the other stuff or information or anything else. I feel like I really connected with who this student actually is or what their interests are potentially. And that from that day on, I kept trying to keep that focus. It's like, see the student, not the behavior. And when there is a behavior, why is there that behavior? Like, what is the reason? What's happening? Getting to know the student. And that is something that in a book that I'll have coming out later this year, I actually was reading, proofing some of it this morning. And it was a story that somebody else had shared where, very similar to mine, they were prepared based on everything that they had learned about a particular student. But it wasn't until they sat down and they had this one-on-one conversation, they really got to know the student and they figured out why some of the behaviors were happening, or what the life was like for this person, and that made a big difference. And so when I say, see the student and not the behavior, sometimes that's hard because like over all these years of teaching, I've had a lot of really interesting things happen in my classroom. And I don't tend to yell a lot. And sometimes students will say, oh, we heard Miss Poth yelled. And I say, really? Like I can count like on both hands and all the years I've been here, the times that I've really yelled. And I don't like it.
It's
I
so
don't,
good all the time, and then there's that one moment, and then you're
yeah,
always the yelling person, right? Like, there is no going back, like,
yeah,
it's crazy. And
yeah.
I think, I experienced the same thing with my kids as well. It's like, like, 9 times out of 10, you are so great, but they don't remember any of those. They remember the
I
one time
know.
that you yelled. It's like,
Yeah, and I don't like it, but I've learned that I really, when something happens, like initially before it was like I would react. It was a disciplinary action, what was the thing that I had to do because this is what happened. And now I'm more about let's talk about it. And there were other times I had a student do something with digital citizenship, big deal, right? We're using a tool like Nearpod where it's not like back in the day where you had the yeah, Etch a Sketch. And you could write and you could shake and it would erase. Like students have the
yeah.
phones in their hands. And if they're writing on, they're using a tool like Nearpod and you have it on your screen, it's right there. And it was a lesson student. And the student said, I guess I'm going to have a couple days detention. And I said, well, why do you think that? And they said, well, because that's what always happens. And I went, I think I'd kind of just rather have a conversation with you. And when the word came out of my mouth, I was surprised at myself because part of me was like, but wait, maybe I have to give detention because of what happened. But then I thought, I was kind of to blame too because I didn't give them enough instruction. I just figured you have the phone, what's going to happen whenever you write something on your phone. But just because they have the technology doesn't mean that they necessarily know the impact of it or where it's going to go. And so I took full ownership in that as well. And I said, I would rather have a conversation with you about why that happened and what we should do. And I was shocked at myself. And I know this student was equally is shocked, but it was a lesson to be learned. And it surprised me because I didn't, initially I wanted to react like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this just happened. But then I thought, yeah, well, what happened because I didn't prepare the students enough like I should have. And so what do I need to change about myself? And what lessons do I need to help this student learn because of, whatever just transpired in our class? And so that was all part of the same year of kind of changing over to seeing the student and not the behavior. But it's not easy because there are a lot of different behaviors that are out there that we experience. And yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah,
thoughts
I
about
love
that.
this because, like, it asks the question, and I think that this is the key of it is, what is it that we need to change about ourselves? Like, internally, it's kind of saying, we're not perfect. We've made mistakes, and in fact, like, there are times where we are not proud of what we've done, and I'm guilty of that 100%. Like, there are many times where, maybe I was short. Maybe I didn't respond the way that would have been ideal in this situation. Like, for me, it's kind of like, do as I say, not as I do, and the I do, like, that part is wrong. Like, it's like I've actually done something that I didn't want to do, or in if I was thinking rationally, like, I wouldn't have done it that way. So that totally makes sense to me, and I guess the question I have is, like, how do you like dig yourself out of that? Because sometimes you feel like, oh man, I've gone so deep, and yeah, I can understand, like, for on one case, like, if you had a new set of students next year, you could just say, like, oh, okay, well, like, that's going to happen in a coming year. Like, I'll do things differently. I'll start again. But there isn't like a starting again when it comes to your kids and your family. And so, I mean, even if you did it, like, let's say sometime early in the semester, I mean, you still have the whole semester with them. So, do you have any suggestions for, like, what do people do when you've kind of made that mistake? You've done those things. Like, how do we use that as an opportunity to go, like, yeah, I've done things that maybe I'm not always proud of, and that's okay, right? Like, you've done the same. You'll run into this situation too, when you're older, and maybe you've experienced this personally yourself. The question is, okay, but what are you doing about it? Right?
Right.
Like, what did you do? Like, it almost didn't matter what you actually did. It was like, what did you do afterwards? Um, that kind of models the behavior of what you would like to see. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah. Well, you just said it exactly like I would say it too. It's
Okay.
what is it that you do next that makes the difference? Like, and for me, there were times where, and the big thing too is like taking ownership of it as well. And there were times where just, and I've written about it or talked about it, I don't know which or both at this point. And I've had some things happen in my classroom where there was a behavior and I reacted, and I did not really, I was not happy with how I reacted. I didn't feel very good about it, and it bothered me so much the rest of the night to the next day. And that's when I sat down with, if it was a student or if it was the whole class, and I just said, look, I did not handle this the way that I should have. And this is the reason. And in a couple of cases, like in my most recent book, I talk about one thing that happened a couple of years ago. And at the time, there were some other things going on that I was experiencing, and that's not to be made as an excuse, but it helped me to see why I reacted to that. And then I thought, okay, now I need to fix this. Like, what do I need to do to make this right? Because my reaction didn't just have an impact or didn't affect just the one student. Anybody else who's in that same space is also impacted by that. And so, you know, t- taking ownership of it, having the conversation, and then working to build and continue to build the relationships, and being vulnerable enough to say, yeah, I was wrong, or this is why I was wrong, and this is what I'm doing to change that. And that, sometimes we're fortunate in education that we do, and I don't know how students would feel about this sometimes too, but we have them. Like for me, I'm the only Spanish teacher, so if they take
Huh.
the STEAM course with me in 8th grade, and then if they take 4 years of Spanish, there are some students that I've had for 5, and in some cases 6 years if they started language even earlier. And so I love that because I get to see their growth over time, but I also get to see my growth over time. But if you do make those mistakes, we tend to know that we have opportunities to kind of learn from them. And that's an important lesson for us, but it's also an important lesson for students too, about taking ownership, about the power of forgiveness, of building those relationships. And it's not always going to be easy. That even because we're adults doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes, so that we always know what we're doing. I mean, I'm the first to say, like, I'm not an expert. I make tons of mistakes every single day. And luckily, over the years, I've had opportunities where I've been able to go back and have these conversations with students, or I've had students come back and say, remember when I was in 10th grade and I did that? And I'm like, yeah, I remember. And we're talking, I mean, years later. And they say, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, look, you're a 10th grader. I said, and I didn't necessarily react the best way either. I mean, every single day we're learning as we go, and it doesn't matter how long you've been teaching. I mean, we are always going to encounter challenges, or we'll make mistakes, or we could have done something differently and it might have led to a better outcome, but that's just the way it is. And it's like you said earlier, it's, what do you do with what you've learned? And if you've made a mistake, or if you think, oh yeah, I wish I would have done something differently. Okay, now that you know that, the quote, I love quotes: when we know better, we do better. And I didn't quote it exactly the way it is, but Maya Angelou, that's the quote. So for a long time, I really didn't know better. But now that I know better, I've been very intentional about trying to do better and sharing, like, this is what I did. Don't do the same thing that I did. Um, Make mistakes and learn from them. But I think it's just being honest and taking ownership and working at it every single day, to continue to improve is the best that we can do.
I love that quote. Like, when we know better, we do better. And,
Right.
it's building a culture of, like, celebrating failures,
It is.
essentially, right? Like,
Right.
it's saying that, how are you gonna know better? Like, you start off, like, who trains you on this stuff? Like, "Oh, this is the way that you should behave around young people." It's not like you grew up and, "Oh, by the way, there's like a working with young people, like, course that you have to take before you're allowed." No, that's not how things work, right? Like, you've got to build this culture of, like, celebrating failures, and I think this is why, the stories is so powerful for me, and I'd love to get, like, some of your examples. Mm, if you don't mind sharing some of those, because 'cause they're so powerful. Like, I wanna make sure that we have some time for stories. Like, what are those examples of, like, when we know better, we do better, that you can share with us? Like, it could be from your book, or be from your own experience. What are the ones that are really impactful for you?
Yeah, I mean, just for me, when I think back to, well, all the years that I've been teaching, there are specific interactions that I've had, that like I said, I have not been that many where I would say that I've lost it, but I have some that really taught me a good lesson. And one time, and I wrote about this too, is I had a student, we had a very large study hall. I think there were 90 some students in the study hall, most of which were seventh, eighth graders, three teachers trying to manage it. There wasn't a lot of studying going on because they wanted to be social. And it just, there was, I don't even know what brought it on, but it ended up a screaming match between me and a student, and the student stormed out, and I was going after the student, like, okay, go to the office. And I'm pretty sure that's where they were going anyway. And it was towards the end of the year. And I just remember, like, how awful I felt, like, oh, and it wasn't just me and that student. I mean, we're in a room of like 100 people who all witnessed and experienced that. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, how many, like, you forget who's in the room, you forget who's observing. And luckily, I guess, or you could say unluckily, it just depends. It was the end of the school year. And then the next year, which is only a few months later, I had the same student in the first year of Spanish. And we
Uh,
hadn't spoken, like, there wasn't a period of time, because that was a while ago. That was before now, where, I would take the ownership and I would have these conversations. And so it
yeah.
was kind of like, just like under the rug a little bit. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, how is this going to go in this class? And I remember walking past the desk and the student said, I'm sorry about study hall. And I was like, wait, what? And, that had been 2.5, 3 months at that point prior to it. And that was just
Remember
like
it.
the start of a conversation. And that goes back about 10 years ago now. And I'm lucky. I get to see this student almost every year at different school kind of community events. And it's a reminder to me to always think about how I'm going to react to something, and, like, what's the behavior, which goes back to seeing the student, not the behavior. And so
Yeah.
that is one of my favorite stories, because it was pretty heated, and everybody, I mean, I heard about it from other students. And of course, it doesn't take long for it to go through the school, especially in a small school, to say, oh, we heard that you lost it in the cafeteria. And it ends up being like a telephone game, because the messages it's always totally changed around. So the way that it actually happened compared to what the end story is never the same.
No, no, it
Not
turns into its own beast, and it
Yeah,
develops a life of its own. I can
yeah,
totally see that.
totally.
Like, I love this because, uh it was this kind of, yeah, like I recognized this happened, and I did something about it, and there's that kind of wrap up at the end, which I thought was really powerful. Like, I think it's like this power in forgiveness.
Mm.
Like, it is one thing to say that, you've done something and then you've walked away from it, right? Like, or, what? Like, it was in the past, and so what happened was there never was any closure on the initial incident,
Right.
right? And it wasn't until a little bit later when you met them, you're thinking like, "Oh, now I have to deal with this." But actually, it's like, this is really good for you. It's really good for the other person too, to go like, "Look, that was me." Right? And yeah, I made a mistake here. And
Right.
and I'm really sorry about what happened. And you're right. Like, I shouldn't have been doing it in that way. Or, maybe the other person comes back and says, like, yeah, like, it wasn't right for me to yell at that point. And it I don't know how to describe it. Like, there's a peace, you get when you forgive another person. You kind of say like, wow, like, I used to have like this stuff like all like inside, and then we talked to each other and we forgave each other, and wow,
Right.
like, I feel different now.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like, wow, this great burden has been lifted off of my shoulders. I'm not constantly thinking about this stuff anymore. I don't need to, because I know that
Mhm.
the other person feels okay with it. They feel like, yeah, they know that this thing happened, but they've forgiven me, and they've moved on.
Right.
So it's powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah.
I think we can cover these stories for some time, and I want to make sure that, I want to thank everyone who's joining us live actually today. I know this is not an easy time, and there's a lot of other people who are have a lot of activities today, but I think that it is in these stories. And um like, Rochelle, can you tell me a little bit about, there's this, like, the true story book, a little bit about, like, that one kid, like, this story that, like, one kid taught us. Um, like, when you were doing that book and you were interviewing a bunch of educators about that story that really impacted them,
Mhm.
did you see any common themes? Like, were people talking about the same stuff, or is everybody's, like, story, like, just so unique that you can't really put them together?
Yeah, well, interesting that you ask because the book itself ended up, and I didn't know how I was going to organize it because most books have chapters, and with this book, I decided to put it under my theme of thrive, which not anybody really knew what the letters in the word thrive stood for a
Mm,
long time in this book. And when I got the stories, I basically just said, I'm writing this book about what's an experience that you had that you might have told the story to somebody and then you said, yeah, that's a true story. And that had an impact on you, whether personally, professionally, it doesn't matter. We've all had that. We've had a lot of those one kids, but that one kid. And so when these different stories came in and as I read them, I had my theme of thrive, which is tenacity, honesty, relatability, integrity, vulnerability, and empathy. And many of the stories have all of those themes represented in them. And so the hard part was for me to figure out where I wanted to place each story under which part of the word thrive. But like I said, so many of them represent tenacity and vulnerability in the stories. I just tried to put them in the place where I thought that they fit in the best. And
mhm,
there is a common theme throughout them, and it's just the idea that we have so many. I mean, depending how long you've been in education, thousands potentially of students, and they all impact us. We impact them clearly as their teachers, but even in situations like the one I just explained to you, that one is in that book where you feel like, what could possibly be good from that? What's the impact that had? And for me, I remember all of how I felt, the perception of everybody else around me, and then how we didn't have that initial closure from it, but months later, and then we built this really strong relationship, teacher student relationship that has survived long past that. And but I also think, what if I hadn't had that student in class that following year? What would the result be? Was there any lesson learned? So it is a collection of those kind of stories, and about a close friend of mine that had passed away a couple of years ago too, who actually I didn't even realize it at the time, like he was that one kid. And just it's a reminder. All of the stories in this book, there are, including mine. I mean, I have a lot of different stories in there, but there are 37 other educators, and each story it's just I know that anybody who reads it, they'll say, "Oh, yep, I had that one," and "Oh, yeah, I had that experience," or you'll laugh, you'll cry because there are some that are sad, but they serve as good reminders to just make every moment matter and to be vulnerable and open yourself up to building those relationships and connecting not just with students but with teachers. And what comes out of that, just like with this book, being able to learn so much from these other teachers and be really mindful of my students and their situations every single day. So I'm just proud to have the opportunity to share so many stories and to be connected and to learn from these other educators too.
I love this. So many good things here. Like, every moment matters. Be vulnerable with others. Be mindful of like the situation that people are going through. Um, I remember the stories that I have. It's funny, like when I think about these stories, okay, so we asked what was in it, but let me ask you like the opposite, right? Like what was not in it? And I'm wondering, like, if I were to ask the question of, let's consider the situation of people were asking about um, what you taught them, right? Like, was it always like, the any of the content? Did any of that appear in any of the stories? No? Okay. So,
No.
like, this is what I'm wondering. It's like people think like, "Oh, it's the stuff that I do and all the prep work that I did for my classes, and that's what's gonna make them remember me." It's like, no, it's like these opposite of that. It's like, "No, you made me believe in myself when I didn't believe in myself. You made me, like, you helped me understand that, my context. You help under like, you actually spent the time to learn about me, and enough that I could care about, you know, going to school, or it changed my outlook on things. And I think that, to me, this is the part that I find really, really interesting, is the stuff that is as much as what is in there in those stories, uh, like, because that's legacy, right? Like that's what people will remember. They don't remember what you did. They remember how you made them feel. And having that experience, I don't know. It feels like, there's definitely a lot of important reminders of what's important. Like what matters? What matters when it comes to parenting? Is it like that they went to the right, after school programs? Is it they went to the right sports? Is that the stuff that matters? Or is it like, those more subtle things like how you made them feel?
Yeah, it's you make me think a lot about the book now. To back, like, yeah, they're really it's that we're taught and learned and shared between. I mean, not just by students, but that we learned from the students, but of course that they learn from us too. So it's an enjoyable book, and I love it. And my in other words too, because I feel like they're not just specific to people in education. Like you don't have to be an educator to read the book because
Well, that's we might be having a little bit of network connection. But just in case, one of the things I want to also see if I can highlight as well is just your book. So Rochelle has a few things. So on the Amazon Live, you'll be able to see uh, her book. In other words, that's available. Also, her book is also available on Amazon. I'll leave a link so that everyone can get access to it. The True Stories one is the latest one. The lessons from one student. So that's another one. And then if you want to check out her site, she has quite a bit of stuff that she can share as well. Let me go back to this view. Oops. Hold on a sec. Swap. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So another thing that is important, like being able to connect, is just hearing some of the stories that she has shared, and some of the stories of others that can be really heartwarming. Like it helps us connect, and it helps us know that, like, yeah, what we're going through is not unique. It's not just us. And I think that really in this time we need that all the encouragement that we can get. So the other thing is Rochelle, like she is already quite popular uh, on Twitter. So you can find her at rdene 915. So at rdene 915. And another thing that you can do is just visit her site, rdna915.com. And her website includes links to her books. So I would definitely encourage you to check them out. See what you think about them, and yeah, let us know if you have any questions in the chat. And bring her back up. Like, I'm not sure if you can hear us, Rochelle, but if you can, you might need to reconnect. Yeah, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna pause this. So I'd like to ask, what was your major takeaway from today? What was the thing that you found, the story maybe that most impacted you? Uh, are any of these stories that we shared today something that you can relate with? Are any of the things that we create, like we talked about today, kind of things that are important or relevant to you today? And I'm hoping that if you're able, you would join us on uh, to learn a little bit more about these stories through AI Parenting Live. And so we you can just go to our website, aiparenting.live, and from there you can find out a lot more about becoming an AI parenting insider. So it's an opportunity to connect. It's an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what is important and what is how our world is changing. And it's one of the things that I'm really honored to have Rochelle share a little bit about as well, because I mentioned at the beginning that she helps with AI startups, like educational technology, like ed tech startups that are in AI and also in VR. And so, because she's helping out with that, it gives us an opportunity to share some of those insights of where is like that. That's always the question. It's like, where is the future of education going? What is work? How is work changing? I think that those things are really important, and it's one of the reasons why I encourage you go to AI Parenting .live, and then you'll find that actually there's quite a bit of materials. We just last week we had George Valenzuela. He did a great job, talking about. No, it was not last week. It was the week before. He talked about very authentic types of stories of equity, this social emotional foundation. Why do we focus on those things? Because when it comes to technology and automation, all of the things can change except for this, right? Like having that social emotional foundation is going to be important no matter what. If you're really good at this, you're going to have a lot more control because we live in a world where it's designed to evoke anger. Like a lot of news and media is designed to evoke anger, and so we want to have that ability to change how we respond, how we look at the situation. And so this is a really good opportunity for all of us. And with that, I want to uh, close up by just saying, it's these stories to me, hearing them from Rochelle, that really impacted and made me think differently about what we're doing. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is it important to share stories at all? And I think that having that reminder is so important. You never know. Like there's always fun stories. Like this incident today, is a fun story. Like these are things that, yeah, like things don't always work the way that we had planned it. I experienced this a lot, having done many live streams, and I think Rochelle in the same way has done that. And so I want to thank Rochelle for contributing today and for being a part of the live stream with us. And I want to thank you for attending all the way to the very end. You guys are heroes. I've noticed, like, oh, at the beginning we had a few people, and like all the way through the end, you guys are awesome. So I do really appreciate you. We care about you. We love you. And we're sharing these stories because this is how we're all going to grow together. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. And we will see you again next week, where we're going to bring in Brad Wade. Brad is going to be speaking to us a little bit about this little bit more into virtual reality. He's kind of an expert in that area. He's also spoken about AI. And I'm hoping if this all works out, I mean, like technology glitches and everything, that we can do a live stream in virtual reality. I think that would be really exciting to see if we can. Let's see if we can figure it out. It'll be a fun way of getting engaged. And it's one of the reasons why you want to stay tuned to our upcoming posts, and stay tuned to what is happening in the AI parenting world by becoming an AI parenting insider. It's just a mail list. We send you out free stuff on a regular basis. We let you know about additional things that are not included in these live streams, like sometimes we have transcripts, or sometimes we have blogs that come out. Sometimes we have new posts or new courses that are available. That's where this stuff is going to be published. It's all on the live streams. So thank you. We appreciate you. Take care. We'll see you next week. Bye.